In a show with multiple prominent characters, who is the lead character of the show? The one who has the most screen time? The one who's on the title? Or the poster? These are some byproducts of some other qualities that separates the lead from the rest of the characters. A show has to follow some rules and tactics to maintain these qualities. Otherwise, we may have a lead character, technically, but not a very compelling one. And this is what the Falcon and the Winter Soldier failed to do. They failed to make a compelling lead even when they had established and already compelling characters to work with. Rule number 1. The lead takes well-motivated actions that moves the story forward. When a lead makes a decision, good or bad, his motivations behind it has to be justified. Episode 3. Sam refuses to work with Zemo. Makes sense. So far in the Marvel Universe, Zemo has done far more harm than the Flag Smashers. So far so good. Now when a lead has made up his mind, he sticks to it. If other supporting characters join him, he leads a team. If they don't, he goes alone. There is one exception. We'll get to that later. This mentality of not changing his decision, along with a justified motivation, defines a well-motivated action. Within a few seconds, Sam changes his decisions and agrees to follow Zemo because Bucky asked to do so. I'm not saying the lead has to be stubborn in every situation. When it comes to taking a risky or a morally dubious decision, a moral person like Sam should have a stand against it. And how did Bucky convince him? Bucky kinda makes the case that Bucky asking Sam to work with the criminal Zemo is the same as Steve asking Sam to work with Bucky. Or not signing the Accords is the same as working with a murderer, but they are not. Either way, Bucky reminds him about the time Sam didn't sign the Accords, something Sam already knows. Let's talk about the exception to the rule. A character should only change his mind if he's given a new information in any form that compels him to change his mind. This makes the lead well motivated even when the motivation has changed. And so there's a problem with using an information Sam already knows. If signing the Accord is a good enough reason for Sam to say yes, then why did he say no in the first place? Having already known about the Accords, when Sam said no, that means not signing the Accords isn't a good enough reason. When Sam changes his mind, the reason behind his saying no wasn't good enough either. None of his decisions have strong motivations. Let's give Sam a new information. Maybe before changing his decision, Sam finds out the Flag Smashers have burnt down a building and killed people. Now he has a new urgency he didn't have when he said no. If Bucky, instead of these 2 lines, delivered a really touchy monologue presenting the old events in a new light, this could work. If Sam was seen taking his time, going through a mental journey, leaving at first and coming back later, anything that suggests he didn't just bend his knees and agreed to do whatever the other guys told him to do without any struggle or character growth, it would still feel like Sam is leading the story and not being pushed from one point to another by the plot. This is the beginning of the chapter where Zemo is the lead and Sam and Bucky are simply there to follow him blindly, watch him from far, let him roam around unmasked like 2 good side characters. Even when Zemo kills a guy, Sam and Bucky don't take any action. So this warning was just words he didn't mean. They don't even make sure this doesn't happen again. How come Zemo wasn't all tied up when John and Io came to take him after he already deceived them twice? And then Sam and Bucky just had to leave him totally unwashed. Granted, it wasn't really their fault, it was more of Dora Milaje and John's fault. The problem is the writer just handicaps Sam and Bucky every now and then with silly reasons so that they don't come in Zemo's way. Just how a show keeps the side characters occupied to establish the superiority of a lead. Rule number 2. At the time of conflict, the lead stands out. The primary focus of the show has to be the lead, because the lead's trajectory is ultimately what the story becomes about. If the lead is not the primary focus, the show loses its track and feels disjointed. But when there are many characters to follow, how does the lead stand out? The lead has to be the one who's doing something unique, while the rest of the cast are doing something more or less similar to each other. Either he's the most effective, or most active, or worse if that's how the story needs to be, or the best. Now what if the show is not about someone unique? What if the lead is an average Joe? In HBO's The Pacific's Eugene section of the story, among thousands of soldiers crossing the beach, we only remain with Eugene and see the battle through his perspective. Every other soldier's journey is left to the imagination, with Eugene as their reference point. And of course there are soldiers who are better than him, more experienced than him, who are paving the way for him, but we don't really see them. This tells us Eugene is not the best, but he's the best we got. If every other character was given the same luxury of focus, Eugene would become just a face in the crowd. The show Falcon and the Winter Soldier switches to multiple characters so many times that Sam does look like a face in the crowd and not the lead of the show. We see Sam, Bucky, Zemo interrogating this one guy while Sharon is fighting 20 bounty hunters all by herself. Neither Sam is the only focus of the show, nor he's doing anything unique so that our focus can remain with him anyway. Not only this fight sequence is distracting, it's also unnecessary. Had this choreographed fight be in episode 6 instead of whatever Sharon is doing in that episode where everyone else is also fighting, this wouldn't look out of place. If the showrunners really wanted a fight scene, Bucky and Zemo could somehow be out there from the very beginning fighting beside her, while only Sam interrogates the scientist. Don't tell me Bucky and Zemo couldn't be out there because they needed to keep an eye on Zemo. Because they didn't. Rule number 3. The lead is not a spectator during the main conflict. Episode 4. Sam and Bucky rushes to help John and Lemar. But did they save John's life? No. Lemar did. Did they scare the flag smashers away? No. They left themselves. Did they make any impact in the storyline? No. They were only there to fill up the background. At their best, they were fighting nameless characters, and at their worst, they were watching the scenery as it plays out. Either way, leaving no impact on the plotline. This makes them the least important part of the world around them. The only excuse for a lead to watch and not react at that very moment is that he'll act on it visibly and evidently later. The only thing Sam and Bucky reacts to is John's rage killing afterwards. Sam and Bucky could react the same way if they arrived at this point. Then why do they have to be in the background and watch the entire saga? Why the lead storyline is cut off in the middle and put on a hold for a side character? Sam and Bucky are dumped down to show how clever Zemo is, pushed aside to show how skillful Sharon is, and ignored to show how important John Walker is. The reason the showrunners thought they can sideline Sam and Bucky to build other characters on their back because Sam was well established in the beginning and he'll come on the top at the end. But the middle section ends up undoing the establishment done in the beginning, and the ending wasn't good enough to make up for it. If the lead has to be pushed aside in any part of the show, that has to be the first act. If he needs to be pushed around by others, they have to be the minor characters. If he needs to make no impact, it has to be a matter he can afford not to make a big deal about. And yes, someone can break these rules, be creative, and still manage a memorable lead. But the reason Falcon and the Winter Soldier breaks these rules is to establish future projects, which is fine as long as it doesn't jeopardize the main show. That's not what happened here. Sam, John, Zemo, Sharon, 4 of them have a direct connection to Carly, therefore the plot, based on empathy, hatred, personal gain, and revenge. Bucky doesn't have that direct connection. Same about the shield. It's not taken away from him or taken by him. As Bucky has no direct connection with the external plot, the show should lean heavily on Bucky's internal conflicts. But the little time the show has allotted for those conflicts doesn't seem that they matter. The nightmares, the PTSD, weren't further explored. His emphasis on rule number 2, don't hurt anyone, his doubts that Steve was wrong about him, were never brought up again. Then again, I wouldn't be bothered by them if the biggest payoff Bucky got was worth a title character's ending. The payoff isn't in just knowing whether or not Bucky tells Yori how his son dies. It's in seeing how a father reacts to his son's murder, to someone who is involved, someone who he thought was his friend, and most importantly how Bucky handles it. Is Bucky at least a well-motivated character? His temperament was moderated for plot convenience. None of his actions were justified because they're not coming from a cohesive character. Once he's furious with Zemo for taking his diary, and when Zemo kills someone, he's angry on the same level. He feels so guilty for killing someone where it wasn't his fault. Then when someone dies because he is the one who let loose and failed to keep an eye on a mass murderer, he doesn't do anything about it. Once Sam giving away the shield represents Steve was wrong about Bucky, and once it's about losing something closest to what he has as a family. And I'm not sure Sam's doesn't matter what Steve thinks speech solves any of these problems. I can let go the inconsistency it has with previous films, but Bucky's character is not even consistent with the previous episodes. Now the biggest reason for Bucky to be in this story as a title character should be his friendship or partnership with Sam. One of my favorite scenes in Endgame was when Steve hands the shield to Sam. Wasting no seconds, he looks at Bucky. Why? Because he thought Bucky is supposed to be the successor of the shield. Bucky nods positively and then Sam accepts the shield. In Endgame, Sam cared about how Bucky feels before taking the shield, but in fact in Winter Soldier, he doesn't even discuss with him before giving it away. They don't have to be best friends for Sam to know how much the shield means to Bucky. When Sam finds out the Flag Smashers are super soldiers, or at least they use brute force like Winter Soldier aka Bucky, why doesn't he show up at Bucky's door and ask for his advice? If Bucky didn't show up himself, there's nothing in the show that suggests that Sam would reach out to Bucky. So after all these years, they are not even friends. Sam mentions Bucky and Steve doesn't know what it is for a black person to be a Captain America. Why doesn't he, like a friend, tells Bucky? And why doesn't Bucky ask him? Out of nowhere, Sam and Bucky, grudging in anger, decide they'll never see each other again. But that's just the beginning. Maybe they'll share some great moments together and that will bring them closer. No. The show had more important things to show instead, and then all of a sudden in the third act, they are friends. Bucky just realizes what it means for a black man to be a Captain America without having to actually progress to that point on screen. And Sam tells Bucky exactly what he needs to know, like an advice guru and not a friend. Sam and Bucky are not even great partners either. The show knows it as well. Episode 4. First, Bucky agrees to let Sam talk to Carly alone. But then John was able to change Bucky's mind, saying something he should already know. If it is this easy to change his mind, he wasn't really sure about the whole plan to begin with. And as he wasn't sure, why did he let Sam go in the first place? They couldn't use earplugs like before to check on each other? Why is there a scene that shows Sam can't rely on Bucky? And the one scene where they both fight John, even that wasn't a great partnership moment. That was more of a showcase of how strong John is. The show manages to reward John with a Tony Stark moment from Civil War, intentionally or not, without having to give a Steve Bucky moment to Sam and Bucky. Here's my fanfics. I won't try to solve every single problem. I just want a version where the story revolves more around Sam and Bucky and less around the others. Also in this version, Sam doesn't voluntarily give up the shield. It was hinted that Sam gave up the shield because of racism, but unlike some other scenarios, this doesn't have any real-life resemblance, and unlike the case of Isaiah Bradley, we're not told what is the implication of racism here. Sam only mentions that some people are out there judging him, but he already has done far more upsetting things when he didn't sign the Accords. Or maybe it is a good reason and I'm the one who's not getting it because of cultural differences. Sam still shouldn't have given up the shield to the museum/government over Bucky. In this version, it has to be taken from Sam. Episode 1. Sam is one of the honorary guests in a ceremony honoring Steve. He later talks to Rhodey, says he doesn't need to be Captain America to carry that shield. That title only belongs to Steve. We don't see the opening fight scene yet, but Sam learns about the Flag Smashers. After the first snap, when the countries were in shortage of manpower, big countries brought poor immigrants and promised them if they help rebuild the cities, they will be the part of these cities. In the show, they sound more like guests who overstayed their welcome. In this version, they're more like the employees who are asked to return the payment. At the end, a powerful senator shows up at Sam's house, tells him that America needs a symbol of hope, that is a new Captain America holding the shield. This cuts to the last scene of the episode where John Walker is introduced as new Captain America. Episode 2. Bucky looks very upset. He shows up to confront Sam, but Sam doesn't have the time to talk because he needs to catch this guy. Now we see the plane fight, as if Sam never needed the shield anyway. Bucky returns home and sees someone waiting in the hallway with some files. He says he wants the Avengers to look at these files. Bucky says he retired and tells him to contact other Avengers. But the guy insists. More than any other Avenger, Bucky is the one that can help. The guy shows Bucky some clues that suggests the Flag Smashers are super soldiers. Bucky agrees to help. The fact that Bucky wouldn't take any other case, but he took it upon himself to stop the super soldiers, suggests that he thinks this is his personal responsibility. Bucky informs Sam. He highly doubts these people are just thieves. If they took super serum, they're ready for a war. After they meet the Flag Smashers and John, on the flight home, Sam tells Bucky what happened on the day he lost the shield. The senator asked for the shield as a favor for allowing the Avenger to exist without having to sign the Accords. Either Sam gives up the shield or the Avengers ruin their long-distance relationship with the government and risk their freedom. But now Sam doesn't want to live in the past and only wants to concentrate on the Flag Smashers. Bucky then suggests Zemo can help. Sam at first calls him crazy, tells him that justice and law and imprisonment exist for a reason. Then Bucky takes him to Isaiah Bradley, where he learns how justice and law totally turned their back on this guy. Sam gets very upset seeing how instead of being celebrated as a hero, this guy was thrown into jail for 30 years. This heavy episode gets a light-hearted moment when Sam and Bucky are seen bickering over small things in the therapist office. No rule number 2. No, Steve was wrong about me. No, we'll never see each other again. At the end of the episode, Sam tells Bucky if Zemo does anything out of the line. Before he finishes, Bucky assures he won't. Episode 3. Bucky and Sam meet Zemo. Sam tells Zemo they can team up to fight in the super soldiers, but they need some sort of guarantee that Zemo won't run away from them. Zemo swears on his dead family he won't run. As much as we know Zemo, it's a promise we can count on. And only then they help Zemo escape. From then on, Sam, Bucky, Zemo work together. No more secrets, no more staying one step ahead of each other. Zemo doesn't kill the scientist dies because someone blew up the lab, and Sam, Bucky, Zemo survive because a second before this, Sharon was able to warn them. Episode 4. John doesn't walk up to Sam and Bucky. He follows them instead. When Sam is so close to win Carly's trust, John bursts through the windows. At the same time, Lamar bursts in on Bucky and Zemo. Bucky realizes John must be upstairs, and this could lead Carly to snap, and Sam could be in danger. And so he runs to Sam, leaving Zemo on Lamar's watch. Lamar is the one who handcuffs Zemo and makes the mistake of abandoning him. In this scenario, Bucky isn't responsible for the interruption. Also, there's no conversation between Zemo and Sam about taking the super soldier serum because Sam didn't provide any reason why he wouldn't take it in the show. Zemo only escapes when Dora Milaje or John is going to take him, so technically he doesn't break his promise. But this time Bucky guarantees Io he knows where he can find Zemo, so that they don't look like two clueless idiots and this scene doesn't look like a Deus Ex Machina. When Sam and Bucky realize John's life is in danger, they are stopped by this guy, whom they've been building up but didn't really use. Sam urges Bucky to save John, while Sam will stay here and fight. Lamar dies trying to save John, but Carly doesn't care. She approaches John with a knife anyway. Seconds before she reaches him, Bucky pulls out one of the soldiers and breaks John free. Seeing things are not going as planned, Carly and others run. Bucky and John run after two soldiers in two different directions. Meanwhile, Sam loses the fight, and at the end, this guy breaks off the wings, not John. John kills the cameraman. Then he hears Bucky yell his name. He turns around and sees Bucky is pushing through a crowd who just filmed the whole thing. Episode 5. Bucky fights John alone. In this episode, Sam's dialogue sounded unrealistically preachy to me. Instead of this monologue, he tells Bucky, "You gotta tell Yori the truth and stop carrying it around with you." I'd take a clumsy chat between friends over the monologue, which sounds like the writer is trying to talk to the audience and not one character talking to another. Bucky sees his nightmares again, but this time he wakes up in a totally different environment. Then on the boat, Bucky tells Sam, "Sometimes I think Steve was wrong about me." And Sam assures Bucky, Steve was not. Sam tells Bucky, "You are who you choose to be and what you choose to do. You chose to fight for our country again and again and again. You are not what you did when you didn't have a choice. This is necessary." At the very end, the senator once again shows up at Sam's house. Sam tells him, "If you're here to take the shield, you're not getting it this time." Then the man clarifies, he's not here for the shield. He's here to apologize. Apologize for choosing someone as Captain America who looks the part over someone who deserves the shield. Episode 6. Sam and Bucky fight some of the Flag Smashers together on the top of the building. After they defeat them and save the people there, Sam goes after the helicopter, Bucky goes after the cars. Bucky isn't handed the phone, he takes it from a Flag Smasher. Instead of holding the car up with his hands, cause that doesn't make any sense, Sam somehow unlocks the car and gets the hostage just in time before John is taken down by the Flag Smashers. After Sharon gets shot, she calls Bucky and tells him trying to reason with Carly resulted her getting shot. Bucky hands the cell phone to John, tells him to track the other soldiers down, and leaves immediately. The show handles Sam and Carly's friendship like it was Steve and Bucky's friendship. Why doesn't Sam fight Carly? What's the plan here? She'll get tired and surrender? In the new version, Sam fights Carly and tries to talk to her. "Cops are everywhere, they'll shoot you, unless you surrender and walk out with me." Carly still reaches for the gun. Sam tries to cover himself, but before she could shoot, Bucky shoots her down. "I'm sorry, Sam. I couldn't take the chance. I had to kill her." "You're not the one who killed her." Sam delivers his cheesy monologue to the live reporters, not the UN officials, because it's not realistic that politicians will stand and listen to someone lecture them in front of the press. Finally, Bucky tells Yori what happened to his son. He's yelling at Bucky and Bucky is asking for forgiveness. Yori once asks, how does he expect to be forgiven of such a crime? Then Bucky says, because it wasn't me. It was the Winter Soldier. I didn't have any choice. He echoes what Sam told him on the boat. Yori still tells him, never come back here again, and Bucky walks out of the door. He sits upset in his apartment. Then Sam calls Bucky. Bucky doesn't pick up. Sam leaves a message inviting Bucky to join the boat party. Bucky doesn't respond. Next day we see Sam, Sarah, kids, and many others having a great time on the boat, and Bucky is nowhere to be found. Up until the very end, Bucky walks in with a joyous smile and a cake in his hand. I don't think I changed the story too much. I don't think I made it less political, and this version also should have many flaws, which the original show has. But at least Sam and Bucky, in no part of the show, are side characters. Agree? Disagree? Let me know. Like if you like, share if you like, subscribe if you like. And John doesn't tell Sam that Zemo shot Carly because he doesn't want him to find out about the one leftover serum.